Alright there geezers, Jules here for FGS, home of the future games. You know what, I can't do it. You've seen the title of this video. I finally get to gush unashamedly about my love of Warhammer. Not that I don't do that in pretty much every other episode of the Deep Cut that I do, but still this time it is solely around Warhammer games. Because Space Marine 2 is bloody brilliant, right? But the problem is, you probably completed it by now. So you're left there thinking to yourself, scratching your brain, going, what's next? Well, that's why I'm here to help you, my friend. Because yeah, Space Marine 2 is doing the rounds, and while it would be very easy for me to follow this up with, I bloody told you Warhammer is the GOAT, it's far easier for me to open my arms and welcome all newcomers to the hobby with a hearty, yes, brother. But you know what, my friend? The question is, what do you actually play next? Because Space Marine 2 is kind of like the butcher's nails, and now you're going to want to chase that high for as long as possible. Well, I've got some good news and some bad news for you. The bad being that outside of the original Space Marine game, there isn't really another one-to-one in the Warhammer gaming library that is going to sate your appetite in quite the same way. However, the good news is that there are tons, and I mean tons, of other Games Workshop titles out there that really are the realiest dealiest. So let's have a rather giddy chat as yes, me and my 10 actual Warhammer armies are very excited for this episode as I'm Jules, this is FGS, and this is what to play next after Space Marine 2. Oh, and seeing as this is the Deep Cut with Jules Gill, baby, there is of course going to be some rather offbeat choices in here because there are some picks that are just too obvious, mainly because they're brilliant. So before we begin, check out Dawn of War 1 and 2, we don't talk about 3, Total Warhammer 3 and Fire Warrior, thank you please. But let's go on and talk about the other FPS games in the Warhammer library. Because we're going to be kicking things off by talking about titles that keep the action high and the immersion immediate, and take a look at the ream of FPS titles carrying the Games Workshop seal of approval. Boltgun, for example, is a brilliant boomer shooter that you might have seen pop up on your feeds back in 2023, and again recently thanks to the release of his explosive expansion, Forges of Corruption. But what you might not actually know is that it's actually a canonical sequel to the original Space Marine game, which weirdly makes Space Marine 2 the trilogy capper. Set on the Forge world that Titus attempted to save and then was given a personal audit for, thanks there mate, here you play as a lone Space Marine tasked with retrieving a mysterious shard from this now overrun world. With nothing but your faith in the god Emperor, a ton of weapons and a beautifully slidey retro shooter movement style, it's up to you to save the day and look utterly slick while doing it. However, maybe you want your murder to be a little more methodical, in which case I would say that Darktide is the way to go for you next. And while I know that you've definitely heard of this title as well, you might not have been aware that the game has gone through its most significant update of late, which makes it the most accessible and arguably the most fun it's ever been. The Unlocked and Loaded update overhauls item customization and progression, letting you level up weapons to earn new perks, blessings and mods. Plus, it now lets you see how strong a weapon can be at max level, meaning that you don't waste your time on gear that isn't working with your playstyle. And speaking of play, Darktide's gameplay loop of overwhelming odds and coordinating with a team of other players is definitely going to scratch that Space Marine 2 itch. And while you might not be playing as an Astartes meat tank, you sure can dish out the damage where it counts. Plus, this time around, you actually get access to psycho powers that literally let you pop heads like grapes. And that, in my books, is excellent stuff. And now for the slight FPS curveball, as there's actually another title that Space Marine 2 fans should be rabid to play, but it's kind of a bit more difficult to do so, seeing as this game isn't available on any digital storefront or available for play at home. This, my friends, is Defenders of Avarax, a Space Marine VR experience hosted at zero latency venues worldwide, and it allows for up to 8 players the chance to actually become a Space Marine and battle the Tyranid Horde. If you thought that battling through the operations mode in SM2 with 2 battle brothers beside you was an awesome feeling, well, double that and then add 2 Scott Steiner math promo style and then shove that experience right into your eyeballs. This, my friends, is a must for Warhammer fans, and it's something that we here at FGS are actually going to do as part of this year's staff party. What's that? Am I excited? Are Skitarii sexually aroused by toasters? Yes and yes, my friend. Right, so that's the FPS titles, where the S stands for Space Marine. Where do we turn to next? Well, what if we compose ourselves a little and turn to the world of role-playing and tactics titles? As after all, the Astartes always have a big old bonk on for a brilliant plan, and to be honest, there are so many stimulating and outstanding games in this genre that it's genuinely hard to find the best of the best. So make sure you check out Inquisitor, make sure you check out Mechanicus as well, which is actually getting a sequel, Mechanicus 2. Who would have thought, eh? But without a void shadow of a doubt, one game that I heartily recommend is Alcat's phenomenal RPG Rogue Trader, which is basically Baldur's Gate, but through the lens of Warhammer, and had slightly more romancing of people with 3 eyes and claws, which is always brilliant. This game is pretty much everything you would want from an RPG experience. The dialogue is considered, well-researched, and fully immersive with a huge degree of control and player impact. The party of characters that you can recruit are varied and each offers a new insight into the Warhammer world around you. And the combat? Well, the combat is so rich and layered that you could spend hours poring over how to stack abilities, chain together skills, and how best to deploy your squad in order to board wipe the enemy as fast as possible. It is a game that gives and gives the more that you put into it. And while it may be a bit overwhelming to newcomers to the genre, the useful glossary and relaxed pace during the first act really does help onboard players to the mechanics and the wider world of Warhammer 40k. Plus, with space combat, new worlds to explore, a monstrous void ship to manage, and of course every decision determining the outcome of entire regions of space, well, it means that Rogue Trader carries with it a huge sense of satisfaction equal only to the weight of its choices. Plus, with the new Void Shadows expansion having just dropped, there's even more content to dive into, plus an outstanding new party member whose ability to carve through enemies in combat rivals only Abelard in terms of people who you never ever want to piss off. And for those of you not in the know, Abelard is kind of like the Will Riker to your Picard, except instead of romancing everything that moves, he kills it instead. Make it so, indeed. And another tactics game that I definitely cannot recommend enough is Chaos Gate Demon Hunters, which is basically if XCOM was delivered, well, through Warhammer 40k, obviously. What else is it going to be? It puts you in charge of a squad of Grey Knights, a super secretive chapter of Space Marines who are basically the last people that you'd ever want coming to save your ass, because they take the secretive part of that title very seriously and kill pretty much anyone not in their chapter to preserve that status. And yes, that does mean guardsmen and Imperial soldiers as well. Sick. Remember kids, there are no good guys in 40k. Like seriously, everyone in this is just like a different flavour of And speaking of let's talk about how hard this game can be sometimes and why that is a good thing. Because if there's one thing that Demon Hunters teaches you, outside of how cool a Space Marine with full psycho powers is that a plan fixed in stone is one that your enemies can walk on. There's deep thinking with Jules right there. Put that on a t-shirt. Or don't. Therefore, when a wall is destroyed thanks to a rampaging hellbrute or a chaos ambush catches you unawares, take a deep breath, adapt, and yell something akin to "For the Emperor!" because the action in this game is relentless and your battle acumen, well, it needs to be on point at all times. But what this makes for is a wonderful tactics game that never ever lets up, and as a result, feels like you've been smooched by the Emperor each time that you make it through by the skin of your teeth. Plus, this is a game with a metric shed-load of content, from planning your routes across the galaxy, multiple Xenos and heretic races to battle, and a huge wealth of squad customization, meaning that it's easy to sink tens if not hundreds of hours into this title. Plus, again, it's received some beefy expansions since launch, including updates that let you play as a frickin' dreadnought. So yeah, that's reason enough to get this game. Plus, and this may sound like heresy to some, this game is actually better than XCOM in some ways, and that feels weird for me to say because I love that series, because it actually does away with the percentages to hit and instead simply lessens the amount of damage that you do when not in optimal range, which kind of makes perfect sense, as you're one of those highly trained warrior groups in the universe, and it makes you feel like you're always participating in the action and not just having to sit around and pray to RNGesus. So I know what you're thinking at this point. Jules, where's the deep cut for these tactics games? Well, my friend, we're going to go really out there and earn our chops by taking a look at a multiplayer strategy battle game published in 1985 by Games Workshop called Chaos: The Battle of Wizards. Now this might lack the power armor, the posturing dead god on a golden throne, and of course anything resembling what you'd term, well, graphics, but Chaos the Battle of Wizards is a phenomenal title in its own right, and one that I'd argue is still worth a squirt today, and at a push can definitely act as an insight into what it would be like to operate on the side of the god of change Tzeentch, because here your goals are tons and tons of spells and using them to scheme, betray and ultimately murder your friends. Cool! You see here, you and up to 7 other players all compete to be the last wizard standing, and through a turn-based system, each chooses spells to cast before letting them play out at the end of the round. You can summon creatures, you can create shields or fling damaging spells at enemies, or, and this is the best part, you could pretend to cast a spell to fool your friends. You see, each spell has a percentage next to it to show your chances of successfully casting it, and you can increase that by casting spells of the same affinity to create a kind of aura around your sorcerer. However, if you want to scare your opponents, you can fake a spell by creating an illusion and sending that out as a show of force. This is why every wizard has the Disbelieve spell, which removes all illusions from the board, but casting it wastes a lot of time. As you can see, this quickly becomes a game of bluffing, secretly casting and then firing out your most powerful real spells to finish the job. As I said, Tzeentch and the Sorcerers of the Thousand Suns would love this game, seeing as it's their pretty much day-to-day existence. And you too can play it today if you can magic up an emulator. Now, as you can see, we got a bit weird with that last game, but you know what? That perfectly sets the tone for the final chapter of this video, as now we're going to look at the truly offbeat Warhammer games that, while not looking anything like Space Marine 2, do carry something that I feel represents the spirit of that game. Namely, they are big old vibes, huge attitudes, and are a blast to play. And encapsulating all of this and then some is Warhammer 40k Speed Freaks, a vehicular-based combat game that is, without a shadow of a doubt, the most silly fun I've had with a Warhammer game in ages. In this game, you play as a selection of orcs from the Speed Freaks culture who are doing what they do bloody best, which is going fast and killing each other to work out who's the best. Aside from looking utterly phenomenal, the gameplay here is tighter than a Gym Bros muscle vest with a 6-up save, and sees you rocketing through massive maps in a series of ramshackle vehicles and then unleashing even more questionable weapons on your opponents. One of which is a grot who is sitting atop a missile, guiding it to his death and glory. But what I absolutely love about this game, other than the Vigilante 8 and Twisted Metal vibes that it gives off, are the twists that it offers to regular game modes. You see, instead of like a straight up deathmatch, you've got a race to different points of control, and then to end things, you race off to a finish line which offers bonus points depending on where you place. And instead of like a capture the flag or bomb rush mode, here you're dropping the explosive directly into the side of a hulking behemoth of a machine called a Stomper as it walks its way through the map, meaning that environmental hazards and choke points are constantly changing. It's a game that I truly want to succeed because it's clear the devs have considered their approach carefully. And when you see how some players are incorporating Rocket League style moves into their attacks, it's a title with so much more depth than first appears. Plus, it's free, so get those keys in the ignition right now. In fact, I'm so high on Gorg and /or Mork that we're going to continue our Orky love affair and talk about Shooter's Blood and Teeth, which is the answer to the question of, hey, what if Contra and Metal Slug was also Warhammer and you played as this cute little green fella? This game is balls to the walls stupid, and that is in no way an insult, as this game thrives on delivering an over-the-top experience that never takes itself too seriously. In fact, it merely highlights the many, many reasons why you should love orcs in the 40k universe, from their ridiculous Cockney Gouverneur accents to their love of warfare and violence to their unrelenting ability to stare certain death in the face and say, "Yes please mate, I'll be having some of that." And speaking of mates, you can play through this game in co-op mode, which only furthers the enjoyment and the silliness. And trust me, there is nothing quite like taking on an Imperial Titan with nothing but a gun that shoots bullets because you believe it does. Because yeah, that's another thing about orcs. Their entire culture is built around the concept of, if I think that it is true, it is true. There's a rumour going around that the only reason the Emperor is still alive is because the orcs don't know if he is or not. So they believe that he's alive, so that he's just there. And it's why their spaceships fall apart to scrap the moment the last orc on them dies, because there was no actual way that a ball of rubbish would work as a spacefaring vehicle. Seriously, I love them so much, and you will too if you give this game a go. And so we come to our final entry, as it were, the closing chapter on what I think you should play now that Space Marine 2 is done and dusted, or at least until they put out the expansions for it. And it's actually quite an obvious one when you think about it. I think that you should play Warhammer 40k, the tabletop game. If you thought that smashing Tyranids to pieces was fun, imagine building an army, customizing them however you see fit, painting them in your own colors, and then taking them to a friend's house to play the game in real life. And I know, it's expensive, and not everyone is Pablo frickin' Picasso, but when it comes to painting, trust me, the latter part does not matter as much as you think. Edge highlights, blending, glazing, these are something to aspire to for sure, but having fun and painting how you like is, and always should be, the most important thing. Have fun, experiment, and if anyone tells you that it's not lore accurate, tell them to shove that gatekeeping opinion up their arse. Plus, if you want to stay connected to the game that got you interested in Warhammer in the first place, there's actually a Space Marine standalone board game with a unique Titus Mini. I'm definitely not bitter that it's a US and Germany exclusive, and definitely would be open to a fan helping me get a copy because I want that model bad. I want it bad. But still, for cheap, if you live in those areas, you can get a load of minis and a simple game to get stuck into. So there we have it. I think that at the end of the day, you should just play Warhammer. Just feels like a big plug for that. It's not even a sponsored video. I should have reached out, bloody hell. But there we have it. That is what I think that you should do now you finish Space Marine 2. I hope that you've enjoyed this, and hopefully you found some games that have tickled your interest in Warhammer as a whole. Let me know what you think about it down in the comment section below. Have you tried these games already, and are there other ones that you'd suggest? Because like I say, there's a lot of games out there. I haven't even touched on the fact that there's actually, and this surprises me a lot, actually decent mobile games out there for Warhammer. But maybe that's another episode for another time. But until then, I just want to say thank you very much to all the people who are checking out this video. Maybe you're a long-term fan, maybe you're a new fan who's enticed by the world of Warhammer. Hope that you enjoy your time within the hobby space, and welcome to the channel. If you're not already subscribed, do that as well. And if you want to chat to me in the meantime, my social medias are over here, and my lovely editor Mark's social medias are over here as well. But until next time, my friend, at the end of the day, even though we just bonded potentially over a video game which you're killing tons of things that are different to you, we should be starting to build bridges instead of burning them, my friend. Treat yourself with that love, but also extend that to your neighbor as well. It's the only way that we're going to get through this crazy thing called life, and that is together. Trust me, we do not want the Warhammer 40k universe to become our reality. We want to be connected and make sure that we make the world a better place. I mean, just for an example here, Terra, or Earth as it would be in this one, they have to import their air. Yeah, it's a hellscape on there. You wouldn't want to live there. Not somewhere you'd go for a holiday. But still, hope you're treating yourself well. Big love to you, my friends. Hope you're smashing your life goals as much as you are smashing Tyranid skulls. And I'll speak to you soon in the next episode of The Deep Cut with Jules Gill. Baby. Bye.